welcome to the Joy of Being Alive stream. It's so nice to have you here. Um, Assuming people were not here at the very beginning, didn't hear you talk a little bit about yourself, why don't you just introduce yourself so we know who you are? I think, are you muted?
Okay.
There we go.
So the first thing I'd just like to say is that that meditation was incredibly relaxing. I get the sense that you've done this before.
We had at least one live stream already, so I have done it at least once before.
So you're not making this up on the fly. You've actually meditated before and actually guided people through this process.
A little bit.
Because I got that sense in the middle of it that you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, I didn't actually just take a 3-month or weekend-long become a mindfulness teacher training in some poorly lit room in some floor of a building in Manhattan, put on a teacher hat, and then call myself as such. Much like yourself. Also, P.S. If folks don't know, Brian and I actually
not that such trainings exist in the world nowadays.
No,
but
that would be
totally
terrible.
Different. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be terrible if that was a real thing. I also want to mention, before I actually let Brian speak for once, is Brian and I actually studied together at Spirit Rock. That's actually one of the places where we got a teacher certification was through Spirit Rock. But Brian has quite a bit of depth and practice outside of that. So Brian, please let us know who the heck is this guy?
So that's probably for every meditator is who is this guy or this girl or this whatever. So is from a professional context, as you mentioned, to New York City public schools. I am the dean of a high school in Manhattan by the name of Food and Finance High School, serving kids from all 5 boroughs of New York City. And about 6 or 7 years ago, I created a mindfulness class that I call Mindful Fitness. And it was kind of pioneering because first it was early. 6 or 7 years ago, it was kind of early to be doing this kind of thing. But
I think it froze there. I think we lost you a little bit. Brian, you still there?
But
Oh, good.
I'm here, yeah.
Good.
So
you were saying it's pioneering, and I think you were saying that it was because it was an actual class. It wasn't like some offshoot.
Right. Usually comes in and they ring a bell, and it's very valuable. But what I developed was an entire accredited class that actually has a curriculum where you follow principles about following the thoughts, emotion, neuroscientific principles, and it's a 1-semester course. So when I first created this, I actually wanted to measure how this would impact students. So we did kind of I partnered up with a school psychologist, and we did a pre-assessment and with a behavioral assessment exam. And we found that anxiety levels lowered, feelings of inadequacy lowered, kind of across the board. We 10% social emotional improvement. But the thing that really caught my attention, it leaped off the page, was that the ability to concentrate attention across the board in this pilot group of 17 students, and this was only twice a week at the time, in 2015 or 14, their ability to concentrate improved 10%, which is dramatic. Because when I was a kid, I was yelled at and screamed at for pay attention, but no one ever taught me how. Now that was pretty impressive, but I gave this to a math teacher who kind of crunched it, and he's like, dude, you don't realize what just happened. Not only was there a 10% improvement, but your initial at-risk kids who tested as at risk in the pre-assessment,
fingers crossed this comes through.
So this is
Ryan,
the holy grail.
Sorry, we're having a little technical challenge. So you said these initial kids who tested at risk in the initial assessment,
they improved 18.5%.
Wow. Brian,
So, I mean, this
so
is like, to
just
me, this is like,
just
there's no
real
panacea. Yeah.
just real quick, I just want to make sure, because there's some skipping going on. Let's just try for a minute. Will you just kill your camera for a second? We're just going to see if we can get your audio clear. If not, then it's a problem on my side, but I just want to make sure. All right, you still there audibly? Uh-oh, technical challenges. Folks, it's funny because people often will be like, hey, let's just record this ahead of time. And I'm like, no, it'd be so much more fun and feel so much more alive if we do it live. And it's like, well, this is what you get. Okay, so Brian is entirely frozen, it looks like. Let's see if we can fix anything. Folks, as we're sitting here working out difficulties, let me know if any questions arise. And so sorry about the title being incorrect on YouTube. That is a mistake there. Oh, okay. It looks like we lost Brian on the stream. Oh, this is cool. I got two of me. It looks like one of those high school yearbook photos. It's like, you know, you have the other version of yourself up in the corner. Risk and reward, exactly. Okay, so in the meantime, as we're waiting for Brian to come back online, what do you folks think? Any questions here? This is so the general premise is Brian developed a program that has been slowly become adopted by many of the New York City public schools, which, P.S., if you don't know, New York is it's got some very serious at-risk youth, and it's been dramatically impactful. And so he set up a system where you can trade in your like detention or suspension hours for certain amounts of meditation. And the effect has actually been a massive impact on the students and a massive reduction in recidivism. So lo and behold, just pure punishment doesn't actually, isn't the best case scenario for fixing, let's see, is this, oh, this is the other camera. Oh, wow, I have two cameras now. Isn't the best thing for fixing at-risk youth. So let's see, if Brian doesn't come back in, then we'll figure something out. I know. I wished, I had learned meditation when I was a kid, in part because, let's see here. I'm going to just jump into the other view. I learned meditation when I was a kid, just on my own. I just learned meditation through books or that kind of thing, but I had just no guidance whatsoever. I really had no one there to help me through the process or to show me, what to do. Part of what I want this channel to be, and I realize I teach relatively advanced stuff, is to meet that need for people who might not have it otherwise. I think I was so hungry for serious meditation that I became not only really interested in the deep side of meditation, but the really granular technicalities of how to move an ordinary person, which I definitely consider myself highly ordinary, through some of this material, rather than just being like, yeah, just go do it. Here's a book, go do it. I really like the sort of granularity of that discovery process. Okay, we're waiting for Brian. No luck. Let me check my phone if he's like trying to call in. I guess if he calls in, we could just... Okay, he just said he's restarting computer. Okay, great. So, excellent. So, folks, hit me up. What are those questions that are rising for you? Those burning question nuggets. Let's see here. Simbai Bus says, is there a possibility that kids will learn to associate meditation with punishment? If so, how is this mitigated? That is such a great question. I've heard Brian answer that question, so I'm going to wait for him. But that's a very good, thank you so much for that. That is actually a really interesting question. And I think that would be an issue, right? If suspension just meant that every time you had to go and sit down and do this stupid meditation thing. So I'd be very curious from his perspective what that is. And some of the things that are interesting that I've heard is he's doing this, and we want to make sure he promotes his stream. He's doing a live stream with various really excellent meditation teachers on there. And people will ask questions. There's one kid who asked a question, which was like, someone came on about body awareness and yoga and that kind of thing. And they said, hey, why would I want to do some sort of fitness thing? Like, I don't like my body. I don't like looking at my body or being in my body. Why would I want to be more aware of my body? And it's so powerful to have someone even say that out loud. If that was like the end of it and they just said that and were aware of that, the power and implication of that is so powerful, because that's kind of how I felt when I was a kid. I was lucky to have a relatively fit body, but I was like, I hated being physical because I think actually now looking back, it was emotionally too intense to actually physically work with my body. Oh, hey, Brian's back. Yes. Cha-ching. Okay, let's try that.
Were you speaking about the Booker interview just
I
there?
was.
And the student question, that was pretty powerful, right?
Yeah, I was. Exactly. Hey, Brian, the framing is, remember I had you move over just, yep, exactly. Perfect. Little detail. All right, so Brian's back. So Brian, just to go back to where you were, people have asked actually some really excellent questions. So any other questions that folks have, leave those in the chat. We're going to address those. So please stack those up. We'll have lots of fun stuff to talk about. Plus, don't forget, Brian's a very serious practitioner. So any weird meditation stuff we want to talk about, we can go there as well. You were in the middle of saying that there was an 18% reduction in the, or increase in the most at-risk students' ability to concentrate.
Right. So if someone's just picking up now, I created this.
I think people are already. Yeah, people are already.
A pilot program. In New York City public schools in 2014-15, and then 10% of the ability to focus attention, to concentrate, improved by 10% across the board. But then we later figured out that the at-risk kids who measured in the gray area, I mean, lots of significant social emotional challenges, anxiety, depression, you name it, their ability to focus their attention improved 18.5%. Now, from my point of view, and I don't want to oversell because there's no panacea, there's no cure-all, but this was highly, highly encouraging. Because, I mean, everybody remembers being a kid in school, either yourself or the people around you. It's like near impossible, especially for, many kids in the room who just cannot sit still. They can't listen for like 30 seconds straight. And those kids dramatically changed. So with this progress, I showed it to the school principal and he said, well, what do you want to do with this? I said, here's what I want to do. I want to normalize this. I don't want it to be an after-school program. I don't want it to be a cute little thing that we ring a bell once a week or something. I want a class. You go to social studies, you go to science, you go to English, and you go to what I would later call mindful fitness. That's got exactly some of the practices you were just mentioning, like body awareness practices. Usually every day we begin with some sort of mindful movement on the floor or standing up. Then we actually sit. And he got the funds and we got 40 meditation cushions, Zafus. So this was profiled in a documentary. You can actually look it up. It was NPR came in and they found out about it. And the name of it was What Were You Thinking? Inside the Adolescent Brain. And it's episode 6 of 6. And about halfway through the episode, they came in and what they were fascinated with was how, I went from teaching an 12th grade English lesson to teaching mindful fitness. But at that transition point, a regular standard classroom dramatically changes. So the bell rings, think of high school. All of a sudden, kids leave the room, lights go off, new kids come in, some kids remain the same, desks get pushed back. A whole circle in 30 seconds is created on the floor. Meditation cushions are there. We're then doing mindful movement. We do a 10-minute, or the time changes, sitting meditation. Then there's an inquiry back and forth. There's a lesson that usually relates to neuroscience in some kind of way. And then we have some sort of activity, and each week has a theme that we focus. So with all of this has been happening for the past 6 or so years. 3 years ago, there was so much success with that, I got promoted to become the dean of the school. And my title is now Dean of Mindfulness and Restorative Interventions. Because the thrust of education nowadays is moving away from the punitive model to a restorative model. So with this in mind, I began to really take, I'm the head of discipline in a, New York City public high school. And a lot of times when I teach meditation out in the world, I get questions about, well, this is easy for you or your stress is low. And I'm like, I'm a head of discipline in a New York City public school. Take a second and digest that, right? I get told to go, I don't know if I can curse on the stream here, but I get told to go F myself. I go get put through all sorts of things from teenagers who are going through whatever they're going through. And many of them are disadvantaged kids from all 5 boroughs.
Yeah, but come on, Brian. Teenagers aren't known for they're known for being easygoing, quiet, normal, easy to work with folks.
And I'm gonna be 100% legit. Like, I just said that, and just as accurately are the sweetest, kindest kids or people you've ever met in your entire life. But part of that gig is being told off and going through
Sure.
crazy circumstances. So the idea is, how can we build this ability to respond rather than react? Mindfulness 101. But when you plant these seeds in young people, especially now with this COVID crisis, one of the first things that I did was, okay, I have an after-school stress reduction group that anyone who is not in my class, they can come in and they can join this. Now that remote learning literally happened overnight, I wanted to recreate one sense of normalcy. So at 2:45 on Wednesdays, we would have a half-hour stress reduction that was drop-in. Anybody, staff, students, anyone could come in. So I wanted to recreate in the exact same time slot that sense of structure. And what I did was I created this little Zoom show called Calm and Connected. So each week I interview a guest expert like you're doing, and they work with the kids, and it's been phenomenal. It was Sebene Selassie 2 weeks ago. She talked to us about belonging in her own, unbelievable childhood and transformation. Last week was Leslie Booker, talked about embodiment. And this coming Wednesday is going to be Sharon Salzberg, and the theme is going to be kindness, compassion, and self-care. So for me as a long-term practitioner, it's exhilarating to know that not only am I benefiting, but it's being shared with young people who may otherwise have no access to these teachings. So that's kind of professionally what I've been doing.
Well, excellent. Okay. And I want to jump into some of these questions, but did you want to add anything else? That's the professional side. Do you want to add anything else about the meditation or teaching side?
I teach mindfulness at different secular settings, Dharma settings, and as a sheer practitioner, I think why you and I, connect on the level of practice is that I'm just exhilarated by this practice. I've been practicing for over 21 years. I haven't missed a day in, a decade. I go on long-term retreats. And it's like peeling back an onion that just gets more and more fascinating. You and I were on a retreat last summer that was just mind-blowing to me. So just forget about the teaching and the professional. As just a practitioner of mindfulness, it's kind of the core of my life. I'm thrilled by it.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I feel like it's like the center of my world. So I see it so often, but I realize how uncommon this is, that, a lot of the folks, like yourself included, we just live and breathe this stuff. This is just the fabric of every moment of our lives is related to this practice. And actually, I mean, that's generally the way that I teach, is to help people bring that in, even if they don't want to teach other people. So that's great. Excellent.
It's just fun.
Yeah, it's just fun. Exactly. And it makes everything richer. This is Shinzen once was like, look, I can't give you the fountain of youth, or I can't make you live longer, but I can make every moment last, and be 10 times richer, which is effectively the same thing.
I grew up Catholic, and I watched on Friday night with my girlfriend, I watched The Passion of the Christ. And the one line from the New Testament, and it's in that movie, is when Christ is, in the Stations of the Cross, and he comes down, and the way Mel Gibson staged it in the movie is, his mother Mary comes up to him, and she's, overwhelmed, and he looks at her and he says, I make all things new. And to me, that's what mindfulness does. It's the recognition that all things are new. They've always been new. They're effervescent in each moment. And that, I think, is what Shinzen is talking about, the fountain of youth. It's not to create newness.
Mm-hmm.
It's to see clearly the new that has always been here.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and that's actually in the Progress of Shinsight class, which is a course that we're going to actually be starting a couple new units soon, using Shinzen system to track the progress of insight. We're on the arising and passing sort of section, and what we're having people do is just note the new quality of every particular experience, not any particular thing, but just that the system reads everything as new if you can sort of let it do that, this sort of reinvention of time over and over again. So that's a lot of fun. I want to jump into some of these questions here. Let's see. Some folks didn't get the instructions, and they just did a do-nothing practice, which is fine, whatever practice you'd like to do. Let's see here. I wish you could search for question marks, because that's really what's important. Rory said, I like the contrast between breath concentration as this and then shifting it to the whole sense field. Thanks. That's actually related. I wanted to include that today because that's related to the retreat that Brian and I did doing the Mahasi style practice, which is typically focused on, rising and falling of the breath. And at first you're just labeling, the breath, rising, falling, and anything else that comes up, you just label it as distraction, and then you label it as more detailed. Maybe it's the sound distraction, and then you kind of get into more and more detail. But I also wanted to show a little bit about the sort of attention and awareness tendency of the mind, and that this larger awareness can be actually very useful. Let's see. Had some confusion about the title. I don't even know why that happened. We thought we changed all the titles in time. Let's see. Oh, someone was listening to you, your introduction. They said this is Dion. Giving their correct pronunciation of that would be helpful. And it says, that's amazing, referring to you. Let's see, that's amazing. I wish someone had taught me meditation at that age. And someone else says, is it possible, and this is a very interesting question, is it possible that the children will start to associate meditation with punishment? And if so, how is that mitigated?
I'm at the early stages of implementing the program that I was discussing before, which is when a kid gets suspended for some sort of infraction, giving the choice to lower it. And I think student choice is the mitigation that you're talking about. If the problem, I think, with punishment is it comes with a sense of control. You're being controlled. Here's what happened. Here's what's going to happen to you. And it's just an unpleasant experience, oftentimes lacking any kind of learning component to it. So I think when you implement something like this, when you allow the student to choose, I don't think that association gets created. I think what gets created is I have free agency. I don't have to take this. I can take it. But when the student makes the choice to do it, they tend to be more open-minded. And that same lesson carries over, I think, when you work with kids in general with mindfulness, and you find different points of entry where it's like, well, some kids are not going to be able to sit for 10 minutes with their eyes closed. Okay, you need to go scribble on a piece of paper over there, and you need to breathe. You do that. You need to move your body a little bit. You do that. So I think the more that you infuse choice into the mix, the less a rigid association of anything is going to really formulate.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very, very, sort of, I used to call it backwards, but it's very, conservative town. We were like hippies growing up on this little farm, and everything I did was wrong, in part because I just didn't understand. Even now, I mean, I felt like the system was extremely arbitrary, and it was just like not really, I'm sure, I feel like it must be better now. It must be better than it is in a tiny little town in Rhode Island. But I was so mad, and I would get, detention and suspension all the time. And you would go into detention, and they would make you like write some stupid sentence over and over again. I still remember these sentences, and it's like, what, like you have this, and I remember just then being really mad, like, we have, it's like I'm renting my brain out to you, and this is what you give me back is like writing an intentionally nonsensical question over and over and over again. Yeah, it's like if
To your point about the change, you actually can't do that anymore. That's considered corporal punishment.
really,
So it's much more narrowly defined nowadays than it used to be.
well,
But to this idea of offering it to kids, when I interview Sharon on Wednesday, I already know one of the questions that I'm going to ask. If you're familiar with Sharon, you know that she had this really difficult childhood. And then in order to find the answer to suffering, she went to India in her early 20s and she found mindfulness and brought it back. So one of the first questions I'm going to say, tell me about your childhood, when she lays it out. So then what happened? You just took a class, third period in high school, and then you found the solution to all this.
exactly.
I want her, the kids who take this for granted, to watch her answer this. This is a very different moment in human history, where as a kid, you can walk into a high school and all of a sudden someone's teaching you this, and you're like, yeah, whatever, let's go to social studies next. Like, this is profound, and people just don't understand how profound the time is that we're living in.
Yeah, and it's also worth, I mean, maybe they'll make the connection, but just to that this person sitting in front of them when you do the Sharon interview is one of the central reasons why this even exists, or you've heard of this word in this country. So that's profound.
And it's going to help that she grew up in Washington Heights.
There you go.
Help.
That's
in New York City.
Exactly. That will help. I'm just going to mention that at some point we want to get a link to your YouTube channel so that folks can see the playbacks of these. But right now, what was I going to say? I'm just going to jump to more questions. So just get that ready when the time comes. And let's see. The questions are, here's one question, is how do I get my kid to meditate? He's 7.
Who asked the question?
This is Ariane. So I'm going to go back. I'm trying to get just rather than saying, it's someone.
All right.
Ariadne.
All right. Ariadne is very active today. I can see this in your.
Yeah.
So here's the very wise answer from me. You can't force a kid to meditate. And the more you try, the more the kid is going to resist.
Mm-hmm.
The best thing that you can do, from my point of view, is to plant the seeds. And when you sell it and sell it and sell it, there will be an equal and opposite reaction. If you create the conditions for the student to practice or the child to practice, and they see some sort of benefit out of your life, they're likely on their own to experiment, even if they don't tell you that you're doing it. This, you were saying earlier about teacher training programs, and people want to teach mindfulness. They, read a book, or they did it 3 times, and they're like, I can teach this. I don't know about you, but I was practicing for a decade or longer before I even considered teaching. One of the hallmarks of teaching is having a grounded, embodied practice. Your teaching must come from that. The students can pick up on that. And if you're not embodied in the moment, they're going to see through it. So practice yourself, become embodied, open the door for this to happen, and then hope for the best.
Yeah. And that's, I have that sometimes where someone will come to me and say, hey, I want to teach my child to meditate. What do I do? And I was like, well, first of all, you need to start, it's not going to be, it's not medicine. It's not a thing where you say put this in your mouth and things will be better. It's a way of relating to reality. And so much of it from a teaching perspective is describing perceptual reality. It's like this, observe this, notice this. And if you don't know that yourself, it's hypothetical. It's not something. Please.
You just made an important point. There's a Rumi poem, and sometimes I have the kids read it, and it's called Two Kinds of Intelligence. Look up the poem and read it, and you'll see he really is addressing this point. In my mind, as a pedagogue, when I introduce mindfulness, we're very much in the early stages of bringing mindfulness into education. And right now, educators couldn't even conceive of this 6 or 7 years ago, and now they're getting the idea that, you can kind of calm kids down. From my point of view, other practices, concentration practices, TM, other practices will calm a kid down, and there's huge value in that. But as a pedagogue, the core of mindfulness is learning. It's understanding reality in this moment, seeing, understanding that you're seeing, feeling, understanding that you're feeling. If you don't have those basic check boxes marked, then you're not going to be able to learn anything. You can't learn a social studies lesson, an English lesson. So mindfulness really is the cornerstone of learning. So as an educator, if you're going to teach kids mindfulness, you're teaching them the very foundation, the process of learning. So that's...
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, it's funny because there are a lot of people who are making inroads here, but I do want to exactly echo what you were just saying, is that most people don't understand the difference between a samadhi or even just a relaxation or concentration practice. And usually what it is it's a relaxation process. And what we're talking about here, which is insight meditation or mindfulness, one is... and it's much easier to do with a kid. Something I had a friend do who was teaching very young kids. They would put glow in the dark rubber duckies on their belly, and they would turn the lights out and they say, okay, well, let's watch the ducky go up and down. Just watching this rubber ducky go up and down, and it would just calm the kids down dramatically. And that's great. And learning to get them to do that and associate it even with the sound of a bell, those kind of things, is excellent. And that's, that might be actually a great place to start, because maybe it's the case that children can't or don't have the capacity to find that stuff. And that said, there are a lot of things, if I were to like wave a wand and say, here's a skill that you could work on that would actually probably help your child, is get very, very aware of your own emotional experience moment to moment, and be able to understand what's happening and notice the same thing in your child. Notice what their emotional experience is based on their body language and their facial expression, and you know your child better than anyone. And observe your own emotional experience, observe their emotional experience. That will tend to help them with the process of mentalizing, help them understand other people's perspectives, which is a huge part of the reflective part of the mind. Give them the general discipline of, what is it called? Not operant functioning, executive functioning, which is, doing things we don't want to do is actually incredibly functional for the rest of our lives. So, watching what happens when et cetera, et cetera. I don't know how sophisticated a kid can get. The only other thing I'd say is what I've done in, older than that, probably like second grader, first, second grader classrooms, is I've just made it a game. And I said, we're just going to play a game. And anytime you hear a sound, you're going to keep your eyes closed. And every time you hear a sound, you're going to point at it. And there's relatively sounds, so they just like going to go like this and sound. Okay, cool. And then have them, with their eyes closed, like point at parts of the room and notice that they could still see parts of the room even with their eyes closed. They didn't have to peek and whatever, and turn it into a video game. Turn it into like, okay, it's like a game. As soon as you hear a sound in your mind, you say the word here, and that's how you tag it. And how many did you get? And you can just use the typical see, hear, feel system, turning it into a game, and that can be really fun. I think my nephew was probably 8, and I taught him that, and he doesn't remember it, but he did pretty well. So yeah, those are some things. Go ahead.
When you talk about how sophisticated like kids can get with this, you and I are cut from the same cloth. We're kind of like nerds with this. Like you like the Shinzen system and you like all the details and all of this. With a kid, of course, that's not going to necessarily be appropriate. But when you open the doorway, what is like dramatically what has increased my faith in this whole practice is to see the pure virgin experience of kids who know nothing of this, and you ring a bell and they sit in silence, and then a kid will turn around like a 12th grader would tell me 3 years ago and look at me. And this is a kid with a very, very, very difficult background, and look to the room and say, when I do this, I am free. This is not a student who knows anything of liberation, freedom, any of these kinds of techniques. And it's so spontaneous that it's like, wow, this stuff really, really works. One other technique, you were talking about the rubber duckies. Like, this is really good for younger kids. One little tiny technique, if someone's watching this, it might be helpful to them. Taking a bottle of water or any kind of clear liquid and pouring glitter into it. So I use this as a metaphor for the mind. So when I first roll out the mindfulness to a kid, I'll say, listen, let's pretend this is your mind, right? It's kind of clear on a Monday morning. You come into school and then you find out that you have a test. And then I shake up the bottle, and then you realize someone's spreading rumors about you. And then the teacher falsely accuses you of something. I'm like, but you can always take a moment, take a pause, and observe. Put the bottle down, and then it just settles. Mm. The whole room feels this. It's palpable. So when I first introduced it, years ago, this was going to be like a one-trick pony. That was just my way of introducing it. But it became so valuable, it turned into, whenever the room is agitated, anyone at any point in time can grab that bottle, shake it, and that's a signal to the room. The room's got to calm down. So now it's become ritualized. At the beginning and the end of the meditation with the kids, I'll say, who wants to do bells? Who wants to do bottle? One kid will grab the bells, and they're the timer. It's 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and another kid grabs the bottle. They shake it at the beginning. The whole room observes it. And then when we come out, they shake it again. And it reinforces so much of this sophistication with the simple visual metaphor that they get like that.
That's great. That's great. And it points to this idea that the myth or the sort of, misconstrued sort of thing that meditation is a completely isolated, you observe your breath with your eyes closed in a cave thing is crazy, because it can be any sensory experience, and typically meditation historically is interactive in some way. It is actually a community of people working to support this process. It's not an isolated experience. So doing it together, doing it with people. But that example you gave is such a brilliant, way to just make it very, very, I can imagine half a dozen games like, okay, as soon as you notice that last flake hit the thing, you have to hit this button or whatever it is. And so they're just watching and waiting for this thing to sort of move and observing the experience. Go ahead.
And that's where the creativity of the kids come in, because in my mind, it's just a very clear visual metaphor. Mm-hmm. It means what it means. And then one girl in that original pilot program, Samantha, years ago, turned around, and one day, like during the share, she's like, when we shake that bottle, I will visualize a problem in life that I have, almost connected to one of those pieces of glitter. And then I just watch it settle, and it feels like the problem settles inside of me. Mm. I'm like, this is human creativity. You know what I mean? This is whether you're 80 or you're 8. You don't need to explain all of that in fine detail. There's a lot of intelligence happening. Again, check out the poem Rumi's Two Kinds of Intelligence.
That's great. And there's also a PS. A number of people are dropping some great ideas for children's resources in the chat. So thank you for that. That's very appreciated. Ariadne, I'm just making sure I get that connect. Ariadne. Okay, thank you for that. Okay. So any other questions before we slide our way into the ether here? Just so folks know, we'll be back here in fewer than 24 hours. We're going to be back meditating, practicing again. We have some more special guests coming up. Michael Taft is going to be joining us soon, date to be decided, and a number of other folks. We're very happy to be here. So any other questions or suggestions? Any suggestions for Brian? Brian, get a haircut. God damn it! No, I'm just kidding. It'd be funny.
I think the whole world needs a haircut right now.
I know. I'm starting to figure out, like, hey, can I cut my own hair? I actually got a really expensive buzzer for my dog because it was afraid of it was quiet because they're afraid of the other ones. And it's like, I can't believe it's really whatever. I've cut my hair for many years.
Maybe we should connect every human on planet Earth, and we should all just cut our hair at the same point in time.
Oh, like a live stream.
Just a live stream global haircut.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Exactly.
I'll work on that detail. So.
Exactly. So, anything else, Brian? What about you? Anything weird? Because we talk weird practice stuff all the time, which we haven't even gotten into about, awakening and path material and all this strange stuff. Anything you want to address out of the blue?
Like I said, we did a retreat this summer in the Mahasi technique, and it was with two of my teachers, Steve Armstrong and Kamala Masters, and they really teach this Mahasi technique, where you are aware of one object at a time, but also infused with this Utejaniya style of practice where you're aware of what the mind is doing with each object. And during the summer, when we really intensively practiced this technique, I broke new ground. I mean, I think you did as well. We had lots of conversations about it. And I was observing when you were leading the meditation that it continues to go deeper and deeper and deeper. It sounds very simple to say, but this idea of just being with one object at a time and knowing it, being intimate with it 100%, in my own practice, it's just unfolding and unfolding. And as you were guiding us, I could feel it. It's just this moment of experience. Oh, look at it, feel it, see it. And it becomes, as you were saying before, it's rich. It's very, very, very rich. It's alive. Yeah. And every moment, it's like you're connecting with life and life and life. And it's just, again, to how you began the broadcast today, it's the fountain of youth.
Yeah. That's lovely. Yeah, and if you think of any other what's happening in your practice, I'll mention a couple, and then we can see if there's anything there that's interesting to talk about. A couple of things that have been like really, really central for me recently have been this one thing that every one of my sensory experiences, whether it's very transcendent or this kind of thing, or just very ordinary and what we think of as our ordinary organized sort of sense experience, that it's the same data, just arranged slightly differently or arranged in like a different shape. And it's started to have this quality where people have been asking me like, oh, about this transcendent experience or that transcendent experience. And I think that by learning the relationship of these two, sort of becoming more expansive or more spacious or this kind of thing, and then seeing the transition, because often we'll be, oh, well, nice and spacious in a meditation, and then the bell will ring. I'll be like, okay, back to my contracted ordinary self, is to watch the transition. And this, for me, has been this aspect of teaching the mind that this ordinary world is just the same material. It's just a little bit more organized in terms of a self and an inside and an outside and that sort of thing. That's been big for me recently.
Years ago, I had this insight. I think it speaks to your point from a little different vantage point. I had spent, I don't know, a month or 5 weeks or something in the forest refuge on a self-retreat. And I really was having very deep insights of emptiness, just lying there and hearing the wind, and there was nothing but the sound sensation, just feeling it's empty, and yet it's alive and rich all at the same time. So then I came back. This is a while ago, maybe 10 years ago, and I was waiting for the subway 2 months ago, and I could hear the clickety clack of the subway going down the track, and I'm like, this is just as empty as the wind was, yet the mind had unknowingly created boundaries where it was like, no, emptiness exists in Barre, Massachusetts, but not on 23rd Street in Manhattan. And it's like, no, with the cab drivers and everyone else, all of this is just the natural world. It's just emptiness presenting itself one moment after the next.
Yeah.
So awakening is everywhere. That's kind of what we're saying.
Yeah, and that actually points to this other thing that's been coming up recently, which is it's very hard to communicate. And I'd be curious if you have some sort of a shorthand for this, or maybe this is just something that's like very particular to what I've been thinking recently. Is that this really thing that I've been coming up to is that the mind shows us things out of contrast, and we typically are drawn towards the most obvious sort of thing. Something's noisy, so the mind is drawn to that. But we can detect, for instance, you can detect the sound of my voice because there's not 1,000 of my voices occurring at any given point. If there were, the mind couldn't pick out the sound of one of my voices, but because of the silence, the mind can absorb and connect with that experience. It's the silence itself which is making the sound of my voice palpable or available to the mind. And all of our senses are like that. We feel a pain in our hand or in our knee or something like that because around that pain is less intense or sort of less painful in that way. And so training in that way, watching this sort of the scale of intensity to less intensity and noticing that it is a scale, and then moving that scale down and moving that scale down, eventually we can observe that the presentness of anything, this is clearly quite present. It feels and is present because the mind knows it differently than exactly how I want to put this clearly, that we know it because it is present, and it had not been present at any other time. This is the moment, and this is the experience in which it is present. So its presentness is pointing to its own absence. Its presentness is pointing to that which is not this, and that's what I've been calling it, not this. And noticing that the presentness of our experience is pointing towards this great vacuous absence, this, the cessation of sensing experience is present in the active qualities, that they're both talking to each other. And I feel like I'm almost there in being able to explain it to people simply and easily, but it's been a slog. But it's the exact same thing, that when this idea of form is emptiness and emptiness is form, it's that the form itself is telling you about its own particular emptiness. So,
prior to working in education, I've been an educator for 12 years, but prior to that, oddly enough, I had a television career. So I was a writer, producer for Comedy Central and different networks. So what I would do is I would create television campaigns for the shows, for South Park or whatever shows there were back in 2002, 2003. Essentially, it was promos, but commercials.
Mm-hmm.
We would write, produce, direct them, all of this. And and probably because I was a meditator, I was a big fan of using silence in a commercial. And a lot of times I felt that, when you had to get approvals, people would say, no, it's 30 seconds. You can't have any silence in there. Like you only have 30 seconds. You have to get the message across. And it was so clear to me as a meditator. It was like, you don't understand. The experience of a viewer watching television is being bombarded with sense data. The second you interrupt that, you've reoriented them, and whatever you present next, they will be 100% engaged in. And the same is true for how a non-meditator lives. No judgment here, just every one of us have been there. When we're not mindful, it's just content, and we're just lost in it. Constantly exhausted in concept. But when you see this contrast between silence and form, again, the vitality emerges out of nowhere. It's like this is coming out of a container of silence, and it's arising up. And you get it.
That's great. No, and I appreciate that. And that's it's just this sort of this experience of contrast. What's it called? Ariadne says, making silence louder. Yeah, exactly that, one technique that I'll do with folks is, and it's a little hard at first, but you just sort of compare what's louder, because the mind again can see by comparison. If you try to listen to something that doesn't have sound, the mind is like, I don't know what you're talking about. My mind won't do that, and the mind will resist and be like, no, we can't do this. But if we compare the sounds between something that has quiet sound and then something that has zero sound, the mind can tell the difference. So you can listen to what's quieter, the sound of this particular relatively quiet room that we're in, or the sound of the sensations of my left hand. And it's for at least an instant, the mind will be like, what? And notice, well, this hand is making zero sounds. And it's that zero having contact with that's one entryway that we can sort of start falling into this, vortex of nothing, way rest at a level that's beyond, perceiving. It's way down there.
I remember being on retreat once, and then, it's common if you've gone on retreat where all of a sudden a song will pop up in your head, and sitting there for days and days, and then the sound of silence, the actual song, just I was eating, and it just deafening just came into my head. It's like there's just this primal intelligence that knows that. Another time it was Amazing Grace with pipe organs in my head. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. That's worth the price of admission.
Yeah, exactly. I remember this is also just a weird audio sort of hallucination thing. Do you know how you can hear the sound of your mind talking blah, 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 just sort of mumbling along, and then whatever. Yeah. Sometimes I'll say the sound of my mind is just it's like tough muttering, and it's telephone bill, like that kind of thing. So I was at a retreat, and I was practicing quite a bit, and I was at a Shinzen retreat, and it was late at night. I was going to sleep, and I suddenly heard the sound of my mind chattering, and it was very chatty, and it was just going on and on, and it was very like, but it was in Shinzen's voice very clearly. It was like explicitly Shinzen's voice, but as I listened to it, it was total nonsense. It was in Shinzen's voice, and it was like, and it was like, it wasn't like, oh, maybe it's off in the background. It was like fully in the foreground. I was like, this is the weirdest thing. It was like cracking me up, and I couldn't get to sleep because it was hilarious. So yeah, that's good times.
But that's also a practical tip, though. When you hear that the voice talking like that, this is what the teacher Utejaniya, if you're not familiar with him, when he asks the inquiry throughout the day, to ask the question, what is the attitude of the mind right now? The tone of that voice will be an indicator of what the attitude of the mind is. Yep. Even if it's nonsensical babble, if the emotion is to the babble, that's the attitude of the mind. It's tense, it's reactive. Sometimes it's got a loving tone to it. So that's a good indicator.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed this thing on retreat where the tempo of the song that is stuck in your head is a very clear indicator of like the speed of the mind? If it's like, if you're walking along and you're just like trying to practice and the mind keeps going like, won't you take me to funky town, doon. It's like, well, the mind is very fast right now. Whereas if it's saying, it's like amazing grace. It's like, okay, well, that's the speed of the mind right now. I don't have to engage in the song necessarily, but it is telling you something about the sort of, and that's true not even on retreat. That's true in general.
One of my best friends who I've known for 20 years, and I dragged him onto a retreat. He has practiced off and on. He actually worked with me at Comedy Central. He was one of my graphic designers every time I created something. He's just Mike Campbell. He's just this great guy. And I bring him onto a retreat, and he's never been on one before. And at the end of the retreat, it turns out he described this profound experience that he had. And only after a couple years of like, not trying to research it, but just reading and seeing like, oh, he had a classical awakening experience. Mm-hmm. Everything he described, was written about 2,000 years ago. But during the 5-day retreat, I guess he was in his head, he heard some sort of like, I think he was hearing, later he told me, Ronnie James Dio, Rainbow in the Dark. So I'm in my own head. I walk by, I see him, and I'm looking to see that he's okay. And when he looks at me, he goes like this. So I'm like, he's rocking on something right now. I don't know what it is, but I hear you, buddy.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, well, the puppy alarm has gone off. The puppy apparently wants to be attended to, so I'm going to have to go. Brian, it was such a lovely delight to have you here. Hopefully you'll be able to come back sometime soon. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave any comments about what you think. And if you want to join us here on the live stream, it's at twitch.tv/deepmindfulness. Brian, good to see you.
Great. Thank you so much, Janusz. A lot of fun.